Good morning and welcome back to our Pacific Morning Show. Thank you so much for tuning in and thank you so much for engaging with our platform. We really appreciate it. If you're going to work this morning, please drive safe, and if you're going to school, I hope you have a wonderful day. With elections happening in October this year, we've decided to create a series that is created not to attack but to inform Pacific peoples of the varying and diverse political views that exist in Aotearoa. With this series, we're hoping that it helps you make a more informed vote and to encourage you to be more engaged in Aotearoa's political arena. Up first, we have David Seymour, who is the leader of the ACT Party, who has had an increase of political popularity in multiple polls, and who's also been very famous for his very infamous comments about blowing up the Ministry for Pacific Peoples. Today, we speak to him about why he thinks ACT is gaining popularity, his true thoughts about his very insensitive comments circulating mainstream media at the moment, and the solutions the ACT Party has for issues affecting Pacific peoples in Aotearoa. Just to make it clear, we do not endorse a single party or political figure. We are strong believers of making information accessible and digestible to Pacific audiences and having discussions that are relevant to our communities. And before we speak with David Seymour, I wanted to share a quote said by famous Brazilian artist named Paulo Coelho, and it speaks, "Culture makes people understand each other better. And if they understand each other better in their soul, it is easier to overcome the economic and political barriers. But first, they have to understand that their neighbor is, in the end, just like them, with the same problems and the same questions." Today, we have David Seymour, the leader of the ACT Party, who is a very popular media personality right now. How are you this morning?
Hey, look, I'm great, thanks, Hana, and thank you very much for having me on Bluwave.
That's okay. Thank you so much for coming through. We appreciate your presence here and you're willing to address Pacific communities, especially with the media that you've been receiving with us, with the MPP comment and things like that. But we'll get to that. I know you've covered it in a lot of other interviews as well. But your popularity with your party has been rising in the polls recently. Why specifically do you think that is?
I'd like to think it's because I have this really old-fashioned idea of what a politician does. Like, you think back to third form, fourth form, or year 9, year 10 for younger people, and they say, look, a politician is supposed to represent a bunch of people and take their ideas to Parliament and then talk to the other politicians and try and work it out so they go forward. And so I started off just knocking on a lot of doors. I've still got the scarring in my knuckles from door knocking, and just listen to what people said, and then when someone puts a microphone on my face like you, I'm probably saying something that I've already talked about with someone else. So definitely that kind of old-fashioned approach to politics has really helped, I think, because maybe I'm a bit naive, but I just think that's how you do it. And it means that I'm hearing people, I'm thinking about solutions, and then I'm putting those solutions back. And it seems that more and more people want that because they know New Zealand's got big problems. They know that things are very expensive. They know that people are worried about safety. They know that there's been a lot more division. People are a lot more cautious and careful what they say because people get offended so easily. So I think people want some real basic politics, and that's what we've been offering.
Right, and especially with what we're seeing right now, how hard it is to make a living here in New Zealand and to survive with the types of incomes and how expensive groceries and gases and those kind of things. Saying that your popularity is rising because of your character and how you're presenting yourself in politics, offering solutions. Do you think the policies that you're presenting right now with your party will actually work as will it walk the talk?
Well, I do think that, but why? It's basically because I look at what Labour and National to some extent have done. I think that they've basically moved away from personal responsibility. They've said the government is going to take more of your money, the government's going to spend it on more things, the government is going to be kinder to people who are criminals that endanger our communities, and maybe if we're nice to them they'll be nice back, and the government government is going to present the treaty as two different types of people living in one place, and you have different rights depending on who you are. And I don't think any of that has worked. I think while the government's been doing that stuff, we've got poorer because more of our money's gone to the government and it hasn't been used well. The services we get in education and health and housing have got worse for the money they've put in. I think we've got less safe because we're trying to be kind to criminals instead of pushing personal responsibility. And we've got more divided because the government says you have different rights depending if you're Maori or non-Maori. That can't work. So our values are the government should do less. It should let people keep more of their own money. It should be really focused on really basic stuff when it comes to education. How many kids go to school each day, and what are they taught, and how do we know they were taught it? Not trying to put more politics into education. I think if you start saying, look, the government's done some things wrong, things have got worse, we're going to run as hard as we can in the opposite direction, I think that really helps.
And, seeing as you won't be partnering up with Labour, if that ever happens, you'll be running alongside National. You guys have obvious differences. For example, they're not willing to go through the treaty referendum. They're not willing. We just had confirmation that they will not be abolishing MPP when they come through. How do you appease that to your voters when National is saying one thing and you're saying one thing?
Well, I had a mentor, a much older man, when I lived in Canada for a year. I worked for him. His name was Preston Manning, and he'd started a party and become the leader of the opposition in Canada. And he said to me, look, David, all politics is ultimately about reconciling conflicting interests so people can live together peacefully. So, yep, there are things that National say they don't want to do that we do want to do. Maybe their voters don't want to do it, but ours do. And ultimately, you come together and find a way forward. I think the challenges, in some ways, are not going to be up to National or ACT if we're in government. It'll be the circumstances. Like, I think the government is in major financial trouble. I think when what they call the pre-election economic and fiscal update comes out in September, we're going to find it's actually much worse than we thought. And then I think people are going to ask, okay, we've had this Ministry for Pacific Peoples. What has it done? It's $30 million a year, 116 employees. Could that money be used better? Because I look at their annual report and they say their major achievement was organising the apology for Dawn raids. Well, I mean, fine, but it wasn't a proper apology. There was no inquiry. They didn't even check that they'd stopped. And I think that's disgraceful, and I just wonder if maybe we should save that money. So we're going to make the arguments, and National will have their arguments, but I think sometimes ours are better.
Yeah. And I'll just say something to that because, as a small business, we're Bluwave. We work in the digital media space in the Pacific. We have received a lot of assistance and support from the Ministry for Pacific Peoples. We've done a lot of work for them, and they've helped give us certain funds that help support businesses that have a proper plan to grow. So I feel like, putting in the report, maybe the Dawn Raids apology event itself may not have been their greatest accomplishments. They've been able to help fund health organizations who are supporting Pacific communities, and there are those other aspects that aren't really shown in the media. But I do feel there is value in Ministry for Pacific Peoples. And are you really serious about abolishing it all in general, or decreasing its size and making sure it's more efficient?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I mean, let's start with what you're saying. So I don't necessarily disagree that obviously we need to do better in health and do better in health for Pacific peoples, but actually there's a lot of people that could do with better healthcare. We need more business development. That's certainly true. But is it necessary to have a whole separate ministry to perform good policy in health or good business development policy? I'm not sure that it is. The things that they claim that are sort of distinctly their things, as you say, maybe the Dawn Raid apology wasn't the best thing, but that's what they chose to put as the number one thing in their annual report. So look, I just think if I look at where we're up to in New Zealand, how tight things are, how much money the government's spending, and how much of it's not getting results. I think we're going to have some honest conversations with National, with the country, about what we can afford, because right now it doesn't all add up.
Yeah, and that's a good question that you lay, because that's an ongoing conversation. Does the Ministry of Pacific People need to exist? But we spoke to a health professional the other day on our podcast who was coming, and she was saying in her line of work, one shoe fits all in health doesn't really, it doesn't provide the outcomes that they want. So for example, for Pacific peoples, because of the way that they operate or how they conduct in their culture and values, it's hard to apply a one shoe fits all type of methodology to their approach in health. So have you spoken to professionals in different fields like business or health who have given you insight on those kind of things, or what are your thoughts on that?
No, I've done more than speak to people. I mean, if I'm proud of anything I've done in politics, I was responsible for charter schools or partnership schools. Kurahotoa was the correct name, but we had Sir Michael Jones running Pacific Advanced Senior School. We had Sita Salupe running Rise Up Academy, because you're right, one shoe doesn't fit all, and often people in a community will know better how to deliver healthcare or education, or housing or whatever to a group of people. My point is that every ministry should be working out how to deliver as best it can to all people, and people have different needs, and ethnicity is part of who someone is, but in fact everyone has ethnicity, but most people are more than their ethnicity. And what I'm worried about is that this government has really got a habit of saying that your ethnicity is your most important aspect.
Right.
It's part of who you are, but I don't think that it's healthy to put race at the centre of so many debates. So I think we should be making sure that health and education have initiatives like charter schools, PHOs or primary health organisations that are more attuned, more serving the people in their community better. But if you think about it, every business is trying to do better. I mean, we don't have we have the warehouse. If you want to go and buy affordable goods, you go to the warehouse. There's not like a Pacific warehouse and a Maori warehouse. The rest of the world seems to figure this out.
Okay. So you kind of just want to improve the systems already at place, not place race as the center of decision making, but making sure people's needs and what is needed to improve their communities are still a point to talk about when making policies.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. And so let's go into this MPP comment that got you surging through the everyone's analytics on social media. You said you wanted to go in and blow up MPP, and I'm someone who follows politics a lot. I know a lot of the Pacific communities, if we look at our statistics, not many of us are actually engaged in politics, which is something I want to see change largely. And you came out with a comment. I'm not sure what show you said it on, but you said you wanted to go in, if you had it your way, you'd go in and blow up MPP. Did you mean those comments?
No, and let's just start with some really basic facts. So first of all, it wasn't a live show, as some people have said. I was talking to a journalist on the phone. They were interviewing me, asking a whole lot of questions, and they said, well, how would you, close down these departments, and specifically the Ministry of Pacific Peoples. And we were talking about the fact that they just handed out $121,000 worth of Prezi cards for no clear purpose. That occurred just after they had a $40,000 farewell for their chief executive, which was even Labour say outrageous. So they were interviewing me about that government waste, and he said, how would you get rid of it? And I said, well, and in my fantasy I'd send in a guy called Guy Fawkes, and it would all be over, but of course we wouldn't do that. We would have to do something more formal. So I never said I wanted to. Second of all, I immediately said, but we wouldn't actually do that.
Right.
Thirdly, I don't think a lot of people got the joke. The joke is that Guy Fawkes failed. I mean, he was a guy that tried to blow up Parliament, but he didn't do it. So even the person that I joked about using, not me, wasn't actually very good at blowing things up. And so, people say, are you sorry and should you apologise? I'm sorry about one thing. I'm sorry about the way that some media and some political opponents have tried to make it a attack on Pacific people. It was never about that. It was a throwaway comment about how to blow up wasteful spending, rather than, Pacific people. And when, the Prime Minister of New Zealand goes to Parliament and says, "Oh, you're joking about blowing up an ethnicity." No, that never happened. That's misinformation. And I just want to say to Pacific people, if you've heard that, then I'm sorry you've heard that, but that's not what I said. And it's not something I would ever say. Actually, I made a joke about sending someone who's not very good at blowing things up to blow up a ministry that was wasting money.
Which media was this?
That was News Talk ZB.
Damn it, ZB.
There you go. Blame
They're like,
News Talk
gotcha.
ZB. Yeah, but I also blame, our Prime Minister and other media who have, I think, gone to deliberately turn a wasteful spending issue into a race issue.
Right.
And I think that's really sad because, there'll be people out there now who think that I'm against Pacific people. I want to do violence. And some people say, oh, well, maybe we should do violence back against David because David wants, wrongly thinking that I do. And what those media and other politicians have done is actually damage race relations. So, not my best joke. We all know that. No one's saying it's a great joke. But the way other people have dealt with it, I think, is really irresponsible.
Yeah. And, I wanted to bring this one up with you because it just, if we could bring up the Spider-Man meme, it's like this Spider-Man just pointing at each other.
Oh,
we see
yeah,
it.
I have seen that.
Have you seen that one?
Yeah.
Often in politics, we're just seeing the Māori party pointing at you, saying you're race baiting, you're pointing at Labour, saying you're race baiting, and Labour's pointing at all of you guys, saying you're race baiting. What is your actual definition of what race baiting political scoring for you and your party?
Well, I think, to be fair, we haven't accused other people of race baiting. Other people have said that about us, and I don't know why they think that. That's up to them. I could give you some theories, but I'll let them speak for themselves. Look, my concern is that we now have a government that, particularly around the treaty, believes that there has to be a different Maori everything. And if you look at the curriculum, we want the next generation to learn the best science in the world. The government says that there is Mātauranga Māori, or Maori knowledge, and then there's science, or what they regard as Western science. And if you know anything about science, and I just happen to have a degree in the philosophy of it, science is not something that one race or culture owns. Science is a way of thinking, a way of asking questions and testing your theories against the evidence and then coming up with new theories. And anyone can do it. Doesn't matter if you're Samoan, Tongan, Fijian, Niuean, anyone can do science. And over the last couple of thousand years, lots of people have done science. There was a period where the Islamic golden age, around the Middle East, that's when chemistry was mostly developed in the Islamic world. And then Genghis Khan came but he really buggered things up there. But, science has been contributed to by Chinese, by Indian, by Europeans at different times in history. And what the government's now saying to us is, well, there's Maori science and then there's everyone else's science. Well, that's just not true. And I don't think it helps to start saying that you're either Maori or you're not, and your ethnicity is most important. Then you go through healthcare as well as education. Then you go through 3 waters, and then you go through getting permission to do developments on land, and all of this stuff. You get treated differently. Or you have different rights if you're a different race, and I just think that's bad.
Wouldn't you consider that as part of finding, identifying solutions that fit certain communities, especially ones that were here, that we know historically were here first?
Well, I don't think that 2 people should be treated differently because of when their ancestors arrived in New Zealand. Remember, there was a period in New Zealand history where there was a lot of racism against Pasifika people because they came here last. Now we've moved on from that period, partly because there's a lot of other people that have moved from other countries.
Yeah.
But I don't think we should ever be saying, oh, because someone was here first or their ancestors were here first, they have different rights. I think everyone who legally immigrates to this country, everyone born in this country, you're all human, all Kiwi, all have the same rights. The second thing is we're kind of back to the conversation we were having before of, should social services and should the government be really sensitive to different people have different needs in health and education and welfare and so on. Yeah, absolutely. But I don't know if that requires, I'm sure it doesn't require a separate, Maori and non-Maori version of everything. I think that's wrong, and I also think it's wrong because a lot of people are more than one thing. In fact, all people are more than one thing. I'm part Scottish, but I'm not sitting around saying that, I got to dance around like I'm on the set of Braveheart all the time. So.
I love Braveheart. Awesome. So we've established that I think a lot of the cut clips that we've seen in media has made you look like a very radical a person. But, we've established through this conversation that you are willing to work with communities to identify their needs and also create policies and laws and regulations that fit those communities. So how do you feel New Zealand could further strengthen their relationship with the Pacific? Because, we have a long history of trade, of commerce, and what is the ACT Party's vision for New Zealand Pacific Partnership?
Well, first of all, it's extremely important that New Zealand has closer relations with our friends around the Pacific. I've only ever been on one international trip as an MP. I've never been on a government trip before, and I don't like going on taxpayer-funded trips, but I went with Jacinda Ardern and Chris Luxon to meet Fiame Mataafa last year, and the reason that I went on that trip is that I really think it's important that those of us in the South Pacific who share democratic values are actually standing together around those values, because frankly the Chinese influence in the South Pacific I find quite worrying, and of course it's those Pacific nations that are sort of most vulnerable to it, so we need to stand with them. And I'm just so impressed with the way that Samoa has, there's so many countries going away from democracy. Samoa is this tiny country in the middle of the Pacific that's going the right direction, and I just think that's so cool. So how do we build those strengths? Well, I think we should do foreign aid. I think New Zealand should develop more defence. I think that so that we have a bigger military that can actually get to and assist. I think when that volcano happened in Tonga, it took 2 days before the Navy even left. I don't think that's good enough. The New Zealand Navy should already be in the area.
Exactly.
And I think that we should be looking at immigration. I mean, ACT's view is that we should be pro-immigration, and we should also be open to investment. So it's all about people, money, and goods and services should be able to flow as freely as possible between the islands and New Zealand. And I think that diplomatically we should be strengthening our ties and connections.
Awesome. And our last question, if you were to tell a Pacific person why they should vote for ACT and why your party is the party for Pacific people, what would that reason be?
Oh, look, ACT has a simple philosophy that you should be able to make a difference in your own life and the lives of the people you care about, and that means you don't get treated differently because of your background, because you're Maori or non-Maori or tangata whenua or tangata tiriti. No, you're just a human being and the same dignity and rights as everyone. That's actually what the treaty says. Number two, we need a growing economy. Governments can take lots of money and promise lots of things, but ultimately I've worked in the government and I've seen how people down there don't spend money as carefully as people spend their own. So, lower taxes, more investment, more interesting, high-paying jobs. That's important, making it easier to build a home, because at the moment, if you look at the number of Pacific people that can own a home, it's much lower than others, and I think that's a real tragedy. So, all our policies to make it easier to build a home. Ultimately, people say, we'll give you this benefit or we'll do this. So you've got to make it easier to build homes. Less regulation, more infrastructure funding. And then finally, I think education is just so critical, because the only way forward from one generation to the next is to be more educated. So I'm proud of what we've done with charter schools. I think at the moment there's too much politics in the classroom. There's not enough focus on getting kids to school and teaching them the world's best knowledge, and then testing them and making sure that they can be whoever they want to be. And that's my Kiwi dream, is that even if you're born in a poor community, even if no one in your family has had much education before, that there's a place in your community you can go with high standards, real academic knowledge, and maybe you end up going to Oxford or Cambridge. I mean, that should be possible. If you're bright enough, then the New Zealand education system should give you the pathway, no matter how rich or poor your parents are. So that's my basic vision.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David, for coming onto our show.
Thank you.
We hope this is not our last time. I'll be ringing you again after elections.
And
we'll have another episode and see how this goes. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on our show. My one cents to your campaign: find a really good Pacific person who's dived into their community. They would add a lot of value to your party.
Hana, you're hired.
They would add a lot of value to your party, and they can refer you to the right people and give you some, understanding around our cultures and things like that. But I think that'll really boost ACT in a different way. But thank you so much for coming onto the show. We wish you all the best for your campaign, and we'll see you again soon.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.